it'll be $20. He said, but what if it's just in a coma or something? Like, what if it's not fully dead? He said, all right. Walked over to a cage, opened it. Cat came out, pounced up to the duck, went back into the cage. She said, well, isn't there anything else you can do? He said, yeah, okay. He opened up another cage. A Labrador retriever came bounding out, bounded up to the duck, shook its head, went back into the cage. The veterinarian said, ma'am, your duck is dead. That'll be $120. She said, whoa, whoa, whoa. $120? He said, yeah. Yeah, it was going to be cheaper, but then you ordered the CAT scan and the lab report. All right. Sorry, you were talking about being a veterinarian, and that one popped into my head. But the one I really wanted to tell was the woman came bounding into the house and said, honey, I just won the lottery. Pack your bags. He said, wow, should I pack for the beach or the mountains? She said, I don't care. Just pack and go. You'll see, because that's gonna tie in with our lesson today. We've been talking about the Haudenosaunee. That is the indigenous peoples of Western New York. It means literally the people of the longhouse, because of the kind, not only the kind of house they lived in, but as we're going to see today, the longhouse was also symbolic of a community structure, a way of organizing a village. And so last time we talked about the technical aspects of building and living in a longhouse. Today, we're going to talk about the social aspects of the longhouse. Now, when French explorers arrived in, northeastern in this area, they asked one of the neighboring tribes. They said, those people over there, what are they called? And the members of this neighboring tribe said, those people are called the killers. And their word for the killers was Hilaka. And so the French started calling these people the Iroquois. They kind of Frenchified it. And so today, the indigenous peoples of New York State are still most commonly known as the Iroquois, which was a French twisting of actually a neighborly insult. Collectively, they are known as the Haudenosaunee. That is their native word for people of the longhouse. Although, really, the natives of New York identify more strongly with being a member of one of the individual tribes. Now, this image, which I assume is familiar to us from, you'll see a flag in front of someone's house, you'll see a bumper sticker. This is the symbol of the Iroquois Confederacy. This represents 5 tribes that are kind of bound together. And then during an uproar and some warfare a couple of hundred years ago, a 6th tribe, the Tuscarora, was added. So the Haudenosaunee, also known as the 5 Nations, although really it's also known as the 6 Nations. This is a little bit confusing. But the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, Mohawk. Those are the 5 members, and then the Tuscarora has been added. Something fascinating about this, we are accustomed to seeing this printed on a flag or a bumper sticker. Actually, the design, it's not easy to see in this little picture, but The design originated as a wampum belt design. Now, there was some confusion. The French were confused. They thought that wampum was a kind of money. They thought that it was a kind of currency. Actually, a wampum belt is a way of encoding information. For example, this wampum belt encodes a treaty, a peace treaty, and a treaty of mutual support and defense between these 5 tribes. And if we're unfamiliar, if you haven't seen a wampum belt in a museum, what it is it's made of beads that are carved from quahog shells. And part of the shell is purple or blue. Part of the shell is white. And so you would make these beads by breaking up this shell and then punching a hole in it, and then putting strands of animal leather, like thongs of animal leather, or in some cases making rope out of tree bark, and assembling by hand one of these things using all of these beads. And so even though wampum is not money, it's not currency, it is incredibly valuable in terms of just the human effort that it would take to make one of these by hand. If you can imagine, which is something that I personally cannot imagine, but if you can imagine taking a seashell and punching a hole in it, which today you would have to do with a very specific drill bit. And so the idea that somebody was able to punch holes in seashells by hand using stone tools is really difficult for me to envision. So this design, which is familiar to us, and something that really that's interesting to me about the design, is that when you see it, it looks pixelated. It looks like it was made on like a 1986, computer, where everything was really like blocky and chunky. The reason that it looks that way is that it's from stringing these beads together. All right. Now, we've been taught now, and as a teacher, every time I say Haudenosaunee, I have to pause before it, and I have to like really see these syllables in my head. So I do. I usually say Iroquois. I don't mean any offense by it. It's easier for me to get that word out of my mouth. All right. In the when last we met, we were talking about gender dynamics in an Iroquois village. We were saying that that men in the village were responsible for hunting, warfare, diplomacy. Women in the village were in charge of farming, and only women could own property. Among the Iroquois, among the traditional Iroquois, men were not allowed to own private property. Anything that belonged to a man, if anybody asked for it, he had to give it away, or he had to tell his wife or nearest female relative to claim it as her property, so that it could not just become public property. What did your average Iroquois man own in terms of stuff? A bow, a spear, some basic tools, all of them made by hand. So when I say like somebody could just walk up and take his thing away, he could make another one. He could make another one just as good. All right. Women could own property, and it was only women who could vote, who could elect a chief, and they could also impeach him. Now, as we were talking about last time, being an Iroquois chief, and this is the same for almost all Native American cultures. It was not a job that you wanted. You did not get paid. You could not tax. You did not have the power to tax people. You had no staff, no police force, no jails, no coercive apparatus. You couldn't force anybody to do anything. The only thing you could do is work harder than everybody else, be more generous than everybody else, give away more stuff than anybody else. And then people would respect you. And then when you said, here's my advice, or here's my opinion, they would say, you know what? That guy works really hard and he gives everything away. And therefore, I respect him and I'm going to take his advice pretty seriously. But if you didn't take his advice, there was nothing he could do about it. And if he started acting like he could order everybody around, and if he started acting like everything belonged to him, then the grandmothers of the tribe would just get together and they would vote and they would take away his authority. And then they would show up at somebody else's, show up for somebody else. The Iroquois are a matrilineal culture. That's an anthropological term for when children are considered to be born into their mother's family. We live in a patrilineal culture. We live in a culture where kind of the default is that, for example, a baby gets its father's last name. And in our culture, people are considered to be descended through a male line. In the Iroquois, it was the opposite. You got your mother's clan name. As a matter of fact, who your biological father was not considered to be a major factor in your identity. And if you were a kid, if you were like a little boy growing up in an Iroquois village and you had questions about how to be a man, you would not go to your biological father. You would go to your mother's brother or to your nearest male relative on your mother's side, because it was very important for you to have your clan identity. And your father was somebody who had married into that clan, but he hadn't been raised in it. The Iroquois were also matrifocal, which means that when a couple got married, he would move into her familial longhouse. She would not move into his. They would do this so that her relatives could raise the children. A longhouse. This is a chart of what a longhouse would look like with an interior view. It could be the residence of 50 to 120 people. The longhouse was actually built so that a longhouse it looks like a cigar on the ground, but it was built so that it could be extended. Inside of the longhouse, there were rows of bunk beds on both sides. It was kind of like, a military barracks, or kind of like a sleepaway cabin that could be 60, 100, or more, 200 feet long. The longhouse was communal property. It belonged to everybody, except that if there was ever an argument inside the longhouse, and if the argument could only be settled by somebody saying, you get to stay in the longhouse tonight, you need to go stay somewhere else, then it belonged to the oldest female who lived there. And the people who lived there would be a grandmother or great-grandmother. Her female descendants would all live there. And then if she had sons who were not married, they would live there too. If they got married, then they would move into the longhouse of their wife's mother or grandmother. The word marriage, we really have to put it in quotes when we're talking about Native Americans, and very much so when we're talking about the natives of Western New York. The word marriage, it's descended from the word, does anybody know where the word marriage comes from? The word marriage comes from the word mare. The word marriage means to acquire a female horse, which is why you may notice that at a wedding, the man is called the groom, which is a horse trainer. In case we hadn't put that together. The word bride, which is related to the word bridle, which is something that you use to train a female horse. Our European concept of marriage is actually like very closely related to acquiring a female horse, acquiring something that can work and that can produce, that can make more. That is why you buy a mare, is so that you can work it to death and sprout some like foals out of it so that you can then work them to death. Anyway, I know this is all like a little bit old timey, but this is where these words come from. If we have ideas about marriage, quote, as a very like patriarchal institution, European marriage, yes, it definitely is. Even the word husband comes from animal husbandry. It comes from the person who is in charge of deciding which animals mate with which animals, and then you sell the offspring. Native American, quote unquote, marriage, and I still kind of have to use this word, but is very different. Among the Iroquois, as it was among most Native North American tribes, only women could propose. Men could not propose marriage. And the way that a proposal worked was that a young lady would bake a very special wedding bread. And this was a corn muffin with strawberries. And she would dye it pink with strawberry juice. And she would go to this guy. If she liked this guy, she would go to his grandmother's longhouse and like knock on the door and ask for him. And then she would hold out this pink muffin. And if he ate the cornbread, then the word would go to the girl's grandmother, who would bake 24 more of these muffins, these wedding cakes, bring those to the boy's grandmother, who could say yes, or she could say no. And if she said no, then they would take these corn muffins home, and but they wouldn't eat them because you didn't want to eat wedding cake for a wedding that had been canceled. So then they would actually take the muffins home, and then they would like go hide in the trees. And then when they saw that grandmother again, they would pelt her with these corn muffins. This was, something that we don't necessarily think about being a Native American, is that being a Native American, apparent from what I've come across in my research, being a Native American was actually a lot of fun. There was a lot of like fun about it. There was a lot of laughter in it. Part of the reason, when the Europeans kept saying, "You should be more like us," and the natives kept saying, "We don't want to be more like you." One of the big reasons was that Native Americans thought of Europeans as people who worked too much and didn't laugh enough, didn't have enough fun. And they were like, we have a lot of fun. We laugh a lot. You people, we think of the Native American as being serious all of the time. Actually, the Native Americans, they had a lot of fun. They thought of the Europeans as the people who were too serious and they didn't want to be like us. Anyway, this was their proposal custom. Now, if the grandmother accepted these 24 muffins and the couple, it was decided like, great, now these two are going to get married, then he would go to his bunk, roll up his personal possessions, which again, 4/5 of what he owned, he was wearing anyway. I mean, it was his clothes, but he would just round up his bow, arrows, spear, lacrosse stick, whatever it is that he had. And he would show up with this bundle under his arm and he would move in with his bride. Now, he was allowed to show interest. He could let her know. And the popular way of doing that was to, he could make himself a flute and he could like come up with a tune, he could compose a special song for her and like play this song on the flute whenever she walked by. And then she would gradually, if she really liked this song and if she really liked this guy, then she could go home and bake this corn muffin. But he wasn't allowed to ask. He could only let her know. Now let's think about this for a moment. So you're telling me that this 19-year-old girl shows up at this 15-year-old boy's door and she's got this corn muffin and that's it. This is really different. We don't do this today. Our proposal custom is this. Our proposal custom is that generally a guy has to like get down on one knee holding out this diamond ring. What does the diamond represent in this custom? What does the diamond mean? Because we all recognize this. If you're in a restaurant and suddenly at the next table there's a guy on one knee with a diamond ring, we know the story. We know what's happening. But what does he mean by this? What does the diamond represent? It represents eternity. Yeah, it represents something that is unbreakable. What does it represent economically? How much is the diamond supposed to cost? Too much. And it's relative to your income. A diamond is supposed to represent 3 months of your annual salary. It's supposed to represent 1/4 of a year. Like every penny you would make, you go to your accountant, you figure out what is 1/4 of my annual earnings. And then you spend that much on a diamond. A diamond represents the most wealth that you can get into the smallest space. It is concentrated wealth. It is 3 months of work that can fit in this tiny, I mean, in some cases, some people so tiny, you wouldn't even be able to see it. But why is it so important for this guy when he's proposing to just hand over 3 months of his salary? It's a security deposit. It represents, I mean, it comes from another generation. It represents the guy saying, I will provide for you room and board materially forever. But if I don't show up, or if I'm no good, or if I disappear, or if I die, or if something happens to me, this thing will take care of you for 3 months. This will pay your bills for 3 months so you can get back on your feet, figure out what you're doing next. We do a diamond ring as a security deposit. And this comes from a time and a culture in which a man was expected to be the provider, in which the man was expected to be the sole breadwinner. Now, among the Iroquois, there was no diamond. There was no diamond ring. And the Iroquois woman did not need a diamond ring because the house was in her name. She couldn't be evicted. The property was in her name, and the ability to feed herself and the children was all contained within the longhouse, was all contained within this co-op. And so she didn't need a security deposit because the whole Iroquois system was built around the whole Iroquois system was kind of built around the idea that, like, a man is good to have around if he's around when he's around. But when he's gone, when he's out hunting, or if he's dead, or whatever happens, if he doesn't show up, the children still eat. Nothing is disrupted if a man disappears. And this was their system, was that there has to be stability for the children no matter what. Now, you know, in our system, you know, we have these very elaborate norms, ideas, rules that try to, you know, make a man reliable. And then our system is always breaking down because we keep finding out a man is not really that reliable. Certainly not as reliable as we require him to be. Among the Iroquois, their system, which was put together by a bunch of grandmothers, was men are never going to be that reliable. But we can't have the children going hungry because this guy didn't come home. And so they did this other thing. That's why we need a diamond ring. They did not. Their system was actually, I think, very kind of realistic. So the Iroquois marriage system, I can go straight to this. The plan was that the marriage was going to last for a lifetime. It usually did, but if it was necessary for the couple to break up, it was very simple. Actually, if a husband turned out to be abusive or neglectful or mean, hard to live with, if he wasn't a good father, or if he was just gone too much, then one day he would come back to his wife's mother's longhouse and he would find his bow and his lacrosse stick and his little bundle of stuff, and it would be bundled up outside the door, and everybody in the village had seen it there, and he knew that it was time to pick up his bundle of stuff and move back in with his mother or grandmother. And he also knew that the first question that she was going to be like waiting for him, you know, outside the longhouse, and that her first question was going to be something like, how did you screw this up? And he would go back to living with his mother or grandmother. He would do what he could to rehabilitate his reputation in the village. And chances are someday, some other young lady would someday show up with a loaf of bread and he would get to like try again. So again, the marriage system, usually a marriage did last a lifetime. That was the goal, and they were pretty good at it. But if something wasn't working, the system was designed to protect. And again, this was a system that was invented by grandmothers The system was designed to protect women, and particularly it was designed to protect children. It was designed to protect children from having to move in case of divorce. It was designed to protect children from instability. Like once you were born in your grandmother's longhouse, whatever happened with your parents' marriage, that's where you lived until, if you were a boy, until maybe you were going to, you know, get married into somebody else's grandmother's longhouse. My college students, it's always kind of funny. It's actually not funny. It's always kind of depressing. When I teach this to my college students and then they write me papers and they say like, the Iroquois woman was a housewife. She was stuck at home and she couldn't go anywhere and she couldn't do anything. She couldn't make any choices. And I think, how have I failed so badly to convey what this is? That this was a whole system that was designed to protect people from becoming what we think of as a 1950s housewife. Somebody who has no property, no economic power, no ability to like get out of a bad situation. The Iroquois system was the opposite of that. All right. As I said earlier, and as I said in my message this morning, most of the food, this is like 70–80% of the calories, the food of the Iroquois was corn, squash, and beans. With these, they could make, I mean, a lot of it was eaten as cornbread with beans in it. And when I say corn, in an Iroquois village, you grew numerous types of corn. You grew like 2, 3, 4 different types of corn, 10 or 12 different kinds of beans, several kinds of squash. And you could make bread with these, you could make tamales, you could make soup. A lot of the corn was eaten in the form of corn soup. The Iroquois, actually in an Iroquois village, there was one family meal per day when people would gather together and actually sit down and eat together. But there was a soup pot that just simmered all day long. So when somebody was hungry, they would just take a scoop of corn soup. It was corn soup with beans, and it would have some like venison oil. The Iroquois diet, meat, like a chunk of meat was not the center of the Iroquois diet, the way that it is in ours. Meat was mostly used as like, when you made your big pot of corn soup, you would throw in some like dried like venison jerky, mainly for some oil and some flavoring. Meat among the Iroquois was more like a more like a spice than it is for us. But these 3 plants, corn, squash, and beans, known among the Iroquois as our sustainers, or known as the 3 sisters, because of the way that the 3 plants grew together. So I was talking about this during the message this morning. This is an artist's rendering of what like an Iroquois garden patch would look like. As you can see, the corn stalk is used as a trellis for bean vines that just kind of wind around it. And then you've got the squash down here, which are putting out these large flat leaves that are sheltering the ground. And the shade makes it hard for other plants to grow in. It also protects the soil from drying in the sun or from getting washed away in the rain. So these 3 plants, this is known as companion farming in which the plants are actually working together. They are cooperating in these various ways. Somebody put together this chart, this is it's actually, once you get this started, it is a self-fertilizing garden. The squash plants just become like a natural fertilizer. When you're starting this garden, what you do is you catch a lot of fish, you grind them up, you mix them with like a lump of dirt, and then you take seeds that you have generally in an Iroquois planting, they would sprout the seeds indoors. They would make these little bark cups and keep it inside the longhouse to get the first sprout out of the seeds, and then they would mix it all together and it would all come up. And once you got the thing established, it was self-fertilizing. It was sustainable. I mean, especially in comparison, it didn't require pesticides, didn't require chemicals or chemical fertilizers. It's more sustainable than monocropping. The catch is, with this Three Sisters garden, it all has to be done by hand. There is no machine that is sophisticated enough to like weave through, pumpkins in the middle of a cornfield. And like, it all has to be planted by hand. It all has to be picked by hand. So, we do like monocropping in rows. We do it because it's efficient, and some of it can be done with machines. Do we have any questions about this before we move on? Yeah, like I said, there were like 10 or 12 different kinds of beans that could be in this garden. That was going to be, and that was going to be partly determined by like the particular, okay, let's try it. Let's put it this way. When you started this garden, you would put in seeds of maybe 5 or 7 different kinds of beans. And then months later, when the food was actually coming in, then you would find out in this particular area and in this particular season, in this particular year, this type of beans is doing particularly well. So you wouldn't plant just one kind of bean, because then you wouldn't know. Maybe this just isn't a good year. Maybe this isn't a good rainfall. Maybe this isn't a good, whatever, for this. The idea was to start with diversity and then just let the different bean plants kind of work it out to see which one you were going to have the most of in the coming year. But that is a good question. I've got a list somewhere of the different like species of bean, but I don't have the list up here. Good. Well, yeah. So in our next session, we will continue. In our next session, we're going to look at an Iroquois creation story and how it relates to some of these concepts, how it relates to a matrilineal family, and how it relates to the beginning of farming. So if we have no other questions, then thank you very much, and I will see you next time. Okay, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait a minute. I do. I have a couple of important announcements to make. First of all, next week, next Sunday, that is November 20th, Craig Mulcaber, and I don't know precisely how to pronounce that, but a human rights lawyer for the United Nations, will be the speaker at the service here. So I encourage you to come to that. I encourage you to bring a friend. I cannot be here. Next Sunday, I'll actually be at the Irish Classical Theater in downtown Buffalo. They've asked me to do a spoken introduction for their production of Great Expectations next Sunday afternoon. So if anybody is planning on going to see the Irish Classical Great Expectations anyway, and you want to hear me talk for 15 minutes about the economics of London in the 1860s, that's what will that's happening next Sunday. But that's like an hour after the service here, so it's not a like a one or the other thing. Although somebody did helpfully tell me that I will be doing this introduction at the Irish Classical Theater at the same time that the Bills are playing their next game. So they so I might be talking to an empty room, but at least I know I'm not going to be talking to a room full of people who are like painted blue. Yeah. All right. Well, great. Thank you very much. I will see you next month.